my immediate reaction, which was the wrong reaction, was, well, the retailers will do it themselves. Thankfully, I had a friend of mine who's like, no, you dummy. Retailers don't build technology themselves. They don't build their own point of sale systems. They don't buy their, tracking systems and the security cameras and so like, I don't think retailers will actually build that. So thankfully, I had a friend nearby to smack me up the side of the head and tell me, don't dismiss it.
Studios in our homes. I'm Vanessa Chan from Kinetic Creators, and the theme of today's show is about bringing technology to life. And two questions that always plague new creators is, first of all, how do you really move an idea over to prototype and then to product? And then two, how do you hire the right people, the right technical team to really enable this? And to get us there today, we're going to be talking to a power duo, and you'll see that it's a pun intended later. Doug Baldasare, who's the CEO and founder of ChargeItSpot, and Sheri Tate, who is his SVP of Product Strategy. And in terms of full disclosure, I'm an investor in ChargeItSpot and also sit on their board, but I'm not bringing them on because of that. It's actually because they are one of the most impressive teams I've ever met, and I'm continuously impressed by how they really have an eye on the customer and product. And as such, I wanted the Kinetic creators to really learn some of the secret sauce behind how they do what they do. So Doug and Sheri, welcome to Kinetic Creators. It's great to have you here.
Yeah,
Thanks
good to
for
be
having
here.
us.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get started, maybe Doug, you can give us the elevator pitch of your company, ChargeItSpot, and what your marquee product is.
So I started the business ChargeItSpot 8 years ago when I was doing my MBA. At Wharton, and understand that there's probably a good pen contingent on the call. So always good to see aspiring entrepreneurs at the collegiate level, especially undergrad. The idea for ChargeItSpot really is to solve two key problems. One, as consumers, we're desperately addicted to our phones for so much of what we do every day. When our phone batteries run low, we're anxious, we're stranded, we're panicked. On the other side, we know that traditional brick and mortar retailers are constantly looking for ways to drive customers into their stores, keep customers shopping longer, and ultimately get their customers to buy more things in the store. And so we put free and secure phone charging stations into retail stores like Target, Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, Gap, Banana Republic, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, etc. Consumers charge up for free in a secure locker. Not only are they delighted by the idea that they can, get a free phone charge, also, untethered to their phone, they're more focused on the shopping environment and trying things on, and they spend, because of the increase in dwell and the focus they now have, and we think it's mostly because of the dwell time, but because of that extra time and the focus, they spend 47% more dollars at checkout. And so that's been our big value prop to retail clients is, hey, delight your guests, get them to spend more time and money, and then capture data. This is data that the user inputs to the touch screen. They're clicking next and they're opting in.
That's awesome. So, what you were finding was, you hate it when your cell phone isn't charged. And so having that problem, marrying it to the fact that retailers want people in their stores. And that's how you're really thinking, this is a great idea, and let me build ChargeItSpot. So tell me a little bit, how did you go from that idea to your very first prototype? And I think you had some slides that you potentially wanted to share with folks.
So as most things, this started with visions of Scarface in Miami. I was with three friends on a Labor Day trip. We were actually going to find Scarface on DVD. This was 2011 when DVDs were still a thing. We were going to split up, but our phones were dead or dying, and we weren't going to be able to find each other without making elaborate plans of where to meet, when, etc. And I was standing outside of a retail store, and I kind of said, wouldn't it be great if I could charge my phone in there? And then I very quickly said, well, I'd have to be able to lock it up so I could actually shop, and it would bring me in. It would get me to shop, and then maybe existing customers in the store would stumble upon it. They wouldn't be brought in because of it, but they'd stumble upon it and then perhaps linger longer. My immediate reaction, which was the wrong reaction, was, well, the retailers will do it themselves. Thankfully, I had a friend of mine who's like, no, you dummy. retailers don't build technology themselves. They don't build their own point of sale systems. They don't buy their, tracking systems and the security cameras and so like, I don't think retailers will actually build that. So thankfully I had a friend nearby to smack me up the side of the head and tell me, don't dismiss it. So I was going into the second year of the MBA. And I was actually already kind of in the mind space that I wanted to start my own business. I had spent my summer internship at Amazon, knew that I did not want to work at a big company, and was kind of exploring some ideas. This one kind of fell out of the sky for me. So I took this one as one of the 2 or 3 ideas I was exploring, and I started to do some research, talk to people who knew more than I did. One of the themes that I've kind of carried through the last 8 years is when you don't know something, think of it as concentric circles. Just find somebody one step closer to what you're actually trying to figure out, and just work your way through to the center. So I took that approach at the very beginning to learn I've never worked in retail. I've never built kiosks. Who do I need to talk to learn more and kind of vet this idea?
No, this is great because it really is a theme that we push, is that you need to talk to more people. You really can't invent things in your home. You need to go talk to people, find out the real problems. So I think the fact that you went and knew that you didn't know what you didn't know, I think is a really important lesson that we hope more of our Kinetic creators go drive after. One of the things they do worry about, though, is that they start talking to people about the problem and idea, they might get scooped. Like someone like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, I'm going to do that myself. Did you ever worry about that?
I definitely worried about that. I talked to a classmate of mine who was more like at a later stage in her startup. And I was like I still remember, I was at Fox and Hound at 15th Street and whatever that is, Spruce. Yeah, good sports bar. And she's like, just do it and own it and take it. And if you tell people that you're doing this versus you have an idea you might pursue, people will kind of back off. So if you have incorporated the business, or you're saying, I'm pursuing this idea, I put together a group of investors or advisors, or we're building a prototype, it's then a bigger leap for somebody to take to really steal it from you. Versus if you say, I have an idea that I'm pondering, it feels a little less firm and more stealable. And I just generally don't think people are going to steal ideas. It's like, ideas are great, but like actually doing it is the F ton of work.
That's awesome. So, I totally agree with you, which is execution is 99% of it. And so talking through an idea and understanding the problem is really not that much of a risk. And the other thing too is oftentimes when you're talking through concentric circles, you know that person, you know someone who knows that person. So likelihood also of that happening is really low.
Good point.
So tell me a little bit about your prototype process. So, you hopefully eventually found Scarface.
Yeah, we actually never found Scarface. To this date, I've never, I bet you I could go on Amazon and buy it. The one last thing I want to say about mentorship and getting people's advice at early stage, and then I'll move to the prototype. You're going to hear opposing feedback from smart people. I remember like really smart, accomplished entrepreneurs who I really respect, who would give me opposing points of view, and they could have both been right for themselves, but that's one of the hardest things to kind of sort through. And I think maybe one way to look at it is like really taking their global and overarching wisdom that they might quickly and confidently share, and picking through it because some of it may just not apply to your business.
It's funny, one of my students just privately PM'd me because we went through this last year when she was getting conflicting advice from myself and someone else. And I think the point you make is really good, which is it's all about context. What's the perspective that someone's coming from? And then in the end, nothing is black and white. I think oftentimes when you're coming from a student background where there's a right or wrong answer in a test, in entrepreneurship, it's all gray. And so I think that mindset's an important one to have.
Yep. Last one, this one, then I'll move on. The best mentor and advisor that you can find, in my opinion, is a retired serial entrepreneur, not a current serial entrepreneur. Retired serial entrepreneurs, they've got time, they have a ton of energy, and it has nowhere to go.
That's awesome. Great advice.
Prototype?
So let's move to prototyping. Yeah.
All right. Well, first thing I did was a bunch of research, stood in the street, put on a Penn t-shirt, not a Wharton t-shirt. Penn is more cuddly. You go into the streets of Rittenhouse Square with a clipboard, you ask people questions. It might be a little more difficult these days with people not wanting to talk to you or staying at a distance, but I found that being a student, even when I was a recent student, I'm like, hey, I'm a recent grad, and I could do that for, you know, a year. You can get people's attention and kind of get to the information that'll help inform your business decision to do it or not do it, and then refine the business further.
So wait, so
but
this
this was
picture
like
basically grabbed from Alibaba? Like this is not one of your things, you just took a screenshot?
just took a screenshot and then like used the PowerPoint crop function to like add my stuff here.
Awesome.
The logo I got from like, what is it, 99 Designs, where you can, 99 Designs, I don't know what it's doing these days, but pretty cool like design contest where you need to get a logo for like $50. Like you put out some like, you like kind of say, I want this to be sophisticated versus playful, or, you know, lively versus stoic, or whatever. And then you describe a little bit what your business is and you get a logo for $50.
How did you go from cropping pictures from the internet to then like, okay, now we're going to actually create a prototype?
Not that far
For
off.
those of you who can't see, yeah, for those who can't see, it's basically like a column with 6 lockers in them that are being opened by a lock and key. And so what was your initial order that you got from China? How many?
11 units. Yeah, 11 units.
And were they expensive?
No, they were pretty cheap. They were like $1,200 each.
Awesome. Okay. And then you had them shipped over to the US.
Had them shipped over to the US. Why did I get 11? I guess what I was doing was I had come up with like a 1-pager, and I was literally going door to door in Philadelphia to like different retail businesses, not even asking them to pay me money at that point, but to basically test the hypothesis that venues will host them, venues will take them, and people will use them. Mainly I wanted to see if people were going to use them. That was a big question mark. And so I think I had like enough demand at that point to have 11 units deployed. And so that was kind of what drove the order size.
Where's the first store that you put this in?
I will also say, just because I know that, Vanessa, you're a fan of like kludging things together to make them work. One of the things that we had to figure out was how are we going to know how many people actually charged? These were pretty dumb devices, and we weren't going to sit there. And we knew that was going to be a KPI. Are people using this? Well, how do you know? You could observe anecdotally some, but can you actually report on how many people are using it? So we got this like mechanical counter that it's almost like what an umpire would use to call balls and strikes, but a little different. And it had like a little arm like swing. And I had this undergrad like laser cut some pieces of plastic to the right size. We then glued them in every single locker such that when the door opened, the plastic piece hit the right area of this mechanical counter. And then we would literally just record and write down how many, you know, the number count at each visit, how many days had lapsed, and then just run the math to know how many people were charging. And that was important.
I love that. I mean, I love that because basically when you look at what you built, you did with all off-the-shelf components. You didn't custom manufacture anything. You just assembled a bunch of things and then was really creative on how do you get the information that you need in some cases, or how do you actually get the charging to work? And that's awesome.
Right. First customer was Whole Foods. This was, again, you know, keeping on the theme of concentric circles. There was a Penn professor who knew I was starting this business, and he said, "Hey, I'm friendly with the marketing manager at an area Whole Foods. I know it's a junior person, but would you be interested in, you know, trying to pitch her?" And I was like, "Absolutely." A woman named Dana, I'm blanking on her last name, maybe she's one of the comments. Nope, she's not. And so I went in, I pitched her, and, you know, she was very supportive. Whole Foods is actually a really good target for a first customer. Individual locations make decisions, whereas with every other retailer or grocer, they make decisions at the HQ level, but Whole Foods, their ethos is being, you know, ingrained in the fabric of the community. And so they're empowered to make local decisions. So she's like, "All right, come by another time with my general store manager and we'll see what she says." And so actually one of Vanessa and my mutual friend, Gal, on his birthday on August 12th, 2012, Gal and I drove over in a rental car with one of these units to demo it in the parking lot. And then, you know, they didn't really have any major objections. I was offering it to them for free. And I'm like, why don't we just roll it in and see what happens? And they're like, okay. And so we rolled it in, plugged it into the cafe area, which is where this guy's charging. And I very quickly left because I didn't want them to have second thoughts and tell me I could take it away. But then I came back a few hours later, a little bit more incognito, wearing a hoodie, and just sat in the cafe watching people charge. Within the first 6 hours, we had 50 people charge their phone.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was key data to be able to show investors to raise money for the first round to say, hey, Whole Foods took it. Hey, 50 people used it in the first 6 hours. And now we have a plan to use capital to build a more scalable version of the product.
So what was the time period from when you did the really hokey PowerPoint cutouts to when you dropped it off at Whole Foods? What was the delta of time on that?
Yeah, the caveat is I was a full-time MBA student. So I was kind of like, I was a bit in startup light, I will say. But the PowerPoint was December of 2011. And the first product was installed in August of 2012.
Okay, that's pretty quick if you're a full-time student as well. So that's amazing, right? And so I think that's really inspiring for the students out there, is that even if you're a full-time student, there's a way you can get Whole Foods to be a first customer in about 9 months. So that's amazing. From, you know, a very scrappy PowerPoint to a first customer. That's incredible, Doug.
Thanks. We then got customer reactions on social. These were really important for us to, you know, we didn't have a case study. We didn't have an ROI study that said, hey, you put these in your store and they're going to generate, you know, double the dwell time and 47% more spend. We knew it was intuitive, and we thought that some people would test it and try it on a small scale because it was intuitive. But we wanted to get as much sort of reinforcing, referenceable feedback as we could. And so we had these cool social media slides or posts that we found and screenshot. This was my favorite one. This charging station in Urban is a gift from God, which was very, very cool. At least something that seemed and looked and, you know, felt like we were going to be more scalable with it. So I spent my summer after graduating with a friend who was a classmate of mine who had a free summer before she started her gig at a consulting firm, and had some capital, found an industrial designer in Brooklyn, you know, to build out what could be like a real product. We interviewed many different industrial designers, and the prices range from $17,000 to $150,000 to get it designed. Guess which one we went with? The $17,000 one, and he was freaking awesome. Klaus in Brooklyn was the man. And so he kind of showed how this could work with the screen. I needed to take this from an industrial design to an actual, physical unit. I knew, again, what I didn't know was how to negotiate with a contract manufacturer. I'd never done that. So what I did was I went on LinkedIn. I think you can still do this, and I'm sure you can still do this. I thought the person who would know best how to negotiate against this contract manufacturer was somebody who previously worked for that contract manufacturer. So basically, I wanted to hire somebody who previously worked at this company to negotiate against their former employer. They would know where to push. They would know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. And so I found this woman, Heidi Fry, who previously worked at this manufacturer, Kiosk Information System. She had also worked at Minute Key, which was the startup kiosk business. So I'm like, okay, she's worked at the manufacturer. She's worked on the startup side. And then you can also see she worked at Flextronics, which was a very large contract manufacturer. So I reached out to her and I was like, hey, I'm coming to Boulder because that's where the manufacturer was based, and she was still based in that area. And I'm a recent MBA grad starting a business. Got her on the phone, asked her if I could buy her lunch. And really, really lucked out. Very, very nice woman. Was excited to help a budding entrepreneur. Agreed to join my advisory board, and then proceeded to help me get the best deal possible from her former employer. which was kind of fun and a little bit Machiavellian, but hey, who cares?
Do you have to pay her like to join your advisory board? Like, do you have her equity? How did you get her to get engaged?
Yeah, I paid her in options. Yeah, she was like insanely generous. She was a unique case. So she helped me negotiate with this manufacturer. We got it built. I didn't know how to build software. So I'm talking to Heidi and she says, you know, you really got to talk with Sheri and Jens. They're your guys. 100% they're your guys. They've consulted with us at Minute Key. They previously did software stuff for DVD Play, which became Redbox. Let me get you in touch with them. And so then she did, and we had our first software meeting where it was Jens, Sheri, Heidi, and myself in a boardroom at Jens's law firm in the Bay Area. I think that was 2013, March of 2013 it would be my best guess as to when that was. And at the time, we had a couple early clients who said that they wanted units. And so we were on a tight timeline and we couldn't build this from scratch, both because of a timeline perspective and because to build a software platform for your kiosk in a custom way, that would cost a ton of money that I didn't have. And so this is where Sheri enters the picture.
So you have, you know, this young MBA grad, right? Who's like, I've got this locker that I've got designed and made. It doesn't work, there's no software, but how about you come and help me make this thing work? I mean, that's a little bit of a tough pitch, Doug, no offense, right? Like you don't know who the person is. So Sheri, well, tell me a little bit about, you know, the first time you heard from Doug, what were you thinking? You know, you're an experienced person in the space and here's someone who has no idea what he's doing. He's not an engineer, but he's built something. What kind of got you excited to go work with him?
Yeah, so at first I have to admit I was kind of skeptical. I liked the idea a lot, but the timeline that he presented was, hey, I have this idea, I have a kiosk, I have a manufacturer and a client that I have to deploy in 3 months, but I don't have software, can you help? And it just kind of sounded, you know, insurmountable. And so he said, look, I can be in San Francisco in 2 days. We can sit in a boardroom all day and hash this out. And so I think his energy and enthusiasm and, you know, willingness to just hop on a plane and, you know, within days was kind of intriguing. So as Doug mentioned, we all got together. I was consulting at that time for a few companies, one of which was Minute Key, where Heidi worked. And so, yeah, I thought it would be interesting to hear him out. Great idea. We love the concept. I'm always up for a challenge, and I think that's part of what intrigued me early on. And we kind of did some brainstorming and thought, okay, we don't have time to build this from scratch, but might there be platforms out there that we could you know, take something off the shelf and maybe do some customization to get where we need to go. And so ultimately that's what we did. We found, which I didn't even know at the time, there are a couple of software platforms that are built to drive kiosks. And so we found a company that had this platform and said they could do customization that we needed on top of this. And similar to Doug's story about the hardware, we talked to a few companies and had a range from like 20,000 to 250,000. Guess which company we went with. Yeah, and so we didn't quite make the 3 months, but we actually had a functioning kiosk in about 4 months. So yeah, we've been at it for, I think, 6.5 years now since we first met. So yeah.
And so, you know, just to, you know, get everyone on the same page on where you guys were at that point, before you guys had done everything from Asia, it was like a lock and key. Then you're moving to software, where software is going to be controlling the ability to open up the kiosk, right? And so that was where you stepped in. And the thing that to me was pretty amazing is that for your first kind of software-based prototype, you were still using off-the-shelf things. There's nothing that you were custom making, and it was done pretty cheap, right, for everything, which is pretty amazing. But you were able to cobble things together to bring something to market that's never been brought to market before, which I think is pretty amazing. So tell me a little bit about kind of how you've continued to innovate, right? Because I will say that of the companies I work with, you guys are one of the most innovative, because you'd think, okay, we're just charging a phone in a locker, but you guys have a ton of patents. So talk to me a little bit about your product development process, and how did you start evolving the features over time?
Sure. So I think this is, I think, the fourth kiosk company that I've worked for, and I love the kiosk business because it needs to be presented to the customer as something very simple and elegant and easy to use, and something that they can understand without a sales associate or anyone explaining it to them. People have no idea what goes on behind the scenes. It's pretty complex. So first of all, we have hardware and software, right? And all of our kiosks are internet connected. So all of the data that we're collecting, you know, the touches, what the consumer's doing, what their path is, that's all uploaded to our database. And one of the key things that I learned early on in the kiosk business is it's not just about the product working, you know, in the store, but it's about scalability. And so a lot of what we've had to build is a way to remotely manage a fleet of kiosks, because, you know, we have over 1,000 kiosks deployed right now. You can't be in every store at every moment and be there to respond if something happens. And so we need a way to remotely be able to tell if something's failing, if the kiosk is offline, and be proactive so that we take care of our fleet before the retailer or whichever other venue we're in even knows that something's wrong. So we knew we had to go from this like kind of small potatoes platform to something that was going to be scalable, because Doug's vision was that these kiosks would be in tens of thousands of locations. And so we had to figure out how to make that happen. So
that's really great. You continuously are prototyping, being scrappy, creating PowerPoints, you know, we're cutting, pasting things in, even when you're pretty far down, have a thing. And I think that's great. So I think Doug right now is showing an example of a mock-up of this, where you actually have the sweet pea unit, is what you guys call it. I think this is at North Face, right?
Right.
And so
it
that's
actually
great.
Now is deployed at North Face, but this is fake.
Yeah. Yep. This was all PowerPoint cutting, right? So that's where your skill was on the tech side, right, Doug? Was knowing how to cut.
Not me, thankfully. Yeah. Somebody who has more talent than I do.
But tell me a little bit about Doug. Like, you know, what's fascinating to me is you're not an engineer, you're not a product designer, but you've created something which is requiring engineering and product design. You're bringing people in that have capabilities that you don't have. So it's kind of scary, right? In the sense of you're trusting Sheri and her team to make some pretty big decisions. Tell me a little bit about the relationship between the two of you. How do you guys kind of interact? Because you're starting to make decisions on things that you really don't know that much about, and Sheri's coming to you with ideas. So tell me how your relationship works when you aren't that close to each other from a skill set.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, and I'm glad you segued to that, because what Sheri talked about in being agile and, you know, biting off small chunks, I think a lot of that is possible because of the team we have in place and the trust we have for one another. So that trust starts with the nucleus of the management team. When we found Sheri, we started on a consulting basis for about a year. And she was roughly half-time working for the business, and then she had other clients as well. But during that period of time, we got to know each other and got to develop a level of trust. And like, trust your gut is, I think, kind of a misplaced sort of idiom. You have to like trust your mind. Like, and I draw that distinction just because when you're having conversations with people and in a work environment, and you're able to have healthy dialogue, and they're not like, and what they're saying makes sense. And when you say something that makes sense, they get it, and you're moving at a similar speed, and you have similar views on things, and you know, you're kind of like going in the right direction. Like, you can kind of be like, yeah, that person, we're actually like working together, versus like, I've had people in the past where I'm like, you know, who had just a very different vision, didn't, value the same things that I did, didn't have the same pursuit of excellence, didn't have the same work ethic, didn't have the same ability to move quickly and, intellectually. And so over the course of the year, you start to get that working relationship, but you realize like, it's hard to draw a picture of what that working relationship should look like, but when you're in it much more easily than trying to, forecast out what the perfect person is. So I think you kind of like, listen to your own thinking and you're honest with yourself on, does this person align? Are we keeping up with each other? Do we communicate well? Does it all make sense? And so then I think we had other ways that we brought the team members on board, kind of also in different ways, like a try before you buy scenario. So our head of client success is Jeff. He was one of my first clients at Urban Outfitters. He was a huge believer on the client side. He left Urban Outfitters for personal reasons, but I had some working relationship with him. I already kind of had that same sort of assessment that what he says makes sense and he gets what I say and we communicate well and he's keeping up and there's not moments where I'm like, wow, what a dummy, right? Which you do have with people, right? And you're like, you just don't work with that person, right? And so when he left, and I'm like, he would be a great addition to the team. Then we started talking, and he joined the team, and he's been with us for about 6 years. So he's our head of client success. Our head of operations came from Sheri. So Rob K has been with us coming up on 7 years. Yeah, 7 years. Sheri knew Rob prior to that for about 20 years. They lived in Tokyo and were expats in Tokyo, all part of the same friend group, and has developed a very close relationship with him. And so she referred Rob. And then you find people in the oddest ways. So we have 2 former baristas who both serve Jeff coffee every morning. But Jeff built a relationship with them for years and got to know about their interests, their skills, their background. And when we were hiring entry-level people, he's like, I got the perfect guy for you, Jake. He's my guy every morning. Trust me on this one. And because I trust Jeff and I have that level of understanding with him and that he's not going to very lightly endorse somebody, I'm like, sure, bring him in. Let's give him a chance. And everybody loved him. And so as you build out that nucleus of trusted people, you can then bolt on other people around them because that trust transfers outward eventually.
Now I know why I have mean coffee whenever I come visit you guys. It all makes sense to me now.
Yeah.
So Sheri, tell me a little bit about, from your side of, working with, Doug as the CEO, how has he really built that trust and camaraderie? I have to say that your team is one of the most fun teams. It's like wicked smart. Everyone's sparring, a lot of respect, but a lot of fun. Like we're always cracking up during board meetings. So tell me, are there specific things that Doug has done over time as a CEO to really grow that?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I think that, and for me, this is, I think, why ChargeItSpot gels with me is that, I've learned in my career that you're spending most of your working or waking hours at work. And it's really important who you work with and that you share similar vision and values and everything like that. So, you could have a great job, but if you don't enjoy going to work every day, then, at a certain point, at least for me, I've got to wonder if it's worth it. Doug and I took to each other immediately. I think I like his approach. He's super straightforward. There's no BS, if there's, and he's very open to hearing other points of view. And he will, in fact, seek out points of view that are different than his or that he knows might be, polar opposite because he wants to hear a lot of different ideas to help inform a decision. I really have a lot of respect for that. I just can say that for such a small core team, everyone pulls their weight. Everyone is a rock star at what they do. And so we know that we can count on our teammates and it's just a really great environment.
And I can see it. I mean, the way you guys do everything is exactly you say. It's agile, it's fun, and it's working. And so kudos to you guys for gelling like that, because I will say that I've seen a lot of teams where that hasn't worked. And so it's been great to see. So I'm going to transition to one of our favorite segments for our interviews, which is what we call the domino interview. And so we're fortunate that we have quite a few CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs who are coming on our show. And what we ask them to do is give us a question to ask the next person we're interviewing. And so, Doug, this is a question that we got from our previous interviewee, who was Dr. Liz Bales. She's a CEO and founder of Doc and Phoebe's cat company. And her question to you is, there's always a push not to give up, but sometimes you actually really should give up. So can you tell us a time when you did give up, even though people are like, if you're an entrepreneur, don't give up, just keep going. How did you know you were supposed to give up, and why was it the right thing to do?
One of the ideas we had was, what if we put these units in public areas, like in the center court of a mall, and asked a longer form survey, like 20 or 30 questions, and did it as a quid pro quo in exchange for a free phone charge? And so we tested this out. Initially, the fear was that would be way too long for a user and usage will drop significantly. What we actually learned was that you can ask up to 20 to 25 questions and usage will barely tail off. It will barely drop. And so that was very surprising. And it's kind of like, all right, this underscores the desperation that people have to charge their phone. They're willing to do a 20-question survey. And so our thinking was, well, we can be that interception. We can be the survey tool. We'll get it without having to pay for a human to do the research. And we'll probably get more completed surveys each day than a human will. And you won't have, for example, selection bias. So we ran the sort of business plan, ran the math, and we thought this would be very profitable for us. When you look at how much brands are paying for completed surveys in malls, we thought this would be a no-brainer, and that these market research firms would scoop this up. And we integrated a more elaborate survey technology to have conditional logic, and we kept going. And then at one point, the right hand was not talking to the left, because we were having these weekly meetings, and the project manager, this guy Ashwin, was like, "You're still having weekly meetings on this? Like, this probably should stop. Like, we haven't been getting traction. Like, we could deliver survey responses on 10 or 15 kiosks, but we weren't going to invest and put 100 kiosks out there across the country, or 500 kiosks to get a national sample." That's what these market research firms would need, but they would need that, and they wouldn't give you a guarantee that they're going to run the surveys. They'd say, yeah, when you're at 500, then come and talk to me. So they needed a certain sort of national distribution.
Could you have figured that out earlier, knowing what you know now? Like, what are the markers that you would look for to know that you should stop something?
Yes. Yeah, and I value Sheri's thoughts on this as well. I think as well, kind of going through it, it was a relatively cheap mistake, right? It wasn't like we put $1 million into something. We had half of one employee's time for maybe 6 months. We had, probably in total about like 1.5 full-time equivalents working on this for about 6 to 12 months. Let's say 6 to 9 months. Could we have figured it out earlier? Now we could, because we built the reflex for it. And like, we kind of always say, remember canary, and so I think it takes some of this mistake making to like build your own reflex for it. It's hard to like hear me talk about it, read about it somewhere, and then be able to recognize it when you confront it. It's, for some reason, you have to learn the lesson the hard way. But this time, I think it's more like we check demand early, much earlier. And we're more probing in our questions when we have those conversations with potential clients.
That's great. And so what I'm hearing from you is basically staying close to the customer, and especially early on, you get excited when someone says yes. You should take a pause and go into more of the questions of exactly what they want. And that's what's helping you build your reflex, the ability to listen and to question more.
Right.
So I'm going to flip it to you now, which is, for our next founder who we're interviewing, what question would you like to ask her?
Well, since I got a moderately tough one about giving up, I kind of have to share the love on that one. And And I'd love to ask the next founder about their first fire. What led them to it, how it went for them, why they did it, how long it took them, and what they learned from it going forward.
Would you be willing to answer that question for yourself?
It's kind of like that same thing that you can tell that you're just not communicating with each other well. Like what they say doesn't make sense, doesn't jive with your view of the world. One of the early people I got rid of because he made white lies, and I just could not stand that. And not only do I hate the white lies, but they were dumb white lies. And I'm just like, I can't have this. He was also pretty lazy. He would get haircuts all the time during the day, go for nice long runs during the day. Really had a lovely day to himself, and I'm like, this is not working for me. So he had to go.
And so how do you have that? How do you have that conversation? I mean, I will tell you, I think firing someone's one of the hardest things to do. So how do you steel yourself up for it?
Well, one of the things you can't tell the person you're firing is this is really tough for me because they don't care. It's tough for you. Who cares? You still have a job. I think the most important thing, and I've said this is a really important piece of advice that I didn't get and I wish I got, was before anybody starts work, before you get them an email address, before they do anything, you have them sign every piece of employment paperwork you need them to sign with no red lines. You can maybe negotiate a little bit here or there on some salary or whatever, stuff like that. But in terms of IP protection, confidentiality, non-compete, I made a mistake when I was first getting started, where these two people I hired who ended up not working out were like, we've got way too much work to do. We'll get the paperwork done. Let's not let red tape get in our way. We got so much work to do. I'm like, yeah, they're right. We got a lot of work to do. And so I'm like, yeah, let's get going. And then within 5 days, I had paperwork to them. And then they're like, okay, great. I'll have my lawyer review. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Lawyer should review. And then it started to drag on. And then it ended up that they weren't working out. Now they didn't sign the paperwork. Sort of like they could claim anything. Like I made them a verbal promise for X% of the company, but there was a vesting schedule, and they were within the cliff, so they were entitled to zero. But they'd be like, that's not what you told me. It was what I told them, but it wasn't down on paper. So they basically extorted me, and I had to pay them in cash to sign the documents that they were supposed to sign. It also took a month out of me in the business. For me, I couldn't move on until I got them out officially with paperwork, so I wasn't gonna slave on the business with this, hanging over my head, knowing that I'd be working my butt off and they might somehow get rich off of it if we didn't have this paperwork signed. So everybody who's about to start and has accepted an offer is excited at that point. They're ready to get going, and they're going to sign that paperwork much more likely before they start on day one than on day 5. They'll sign whatever because they just want to get going. Whereas on day 5, now they're integrated with the team. They take it for granted. They've already crossed through the doors. So before day 1, and even I've given this advice to people. One guy in particular, he was like, yeah, but this guy and I were simpatico. We're brothers. I'm like, okay. 6 months later, he's like, how do I get rid of this guy? And what paperwork does he need to sign again? And so I can't stress this enough. As a hard and fast, non-negotiable rule, I don't care who you're hiring. If it's the ex-CEO of Google, I don't care who. Super important.
That's really great advice. I know there's a bunch of people who've gone through this, not just you. And so I think that's really, really sage advice. It's probably similar to when you get married. If you want someone to sign a prenup, you better do it before you cross the aisle. Because asking them when that's already something to do, right? If
you think legal dollars are a barrier, there shouldn't be, because most law firms that serve startups will give you 10 to 25K of deferred fees. So you can use legal services from real law firms to get your incorporation paperwork done, to get your employment agreements drafted. You can spend 25K without actually shelling out a dollar. And then the 25K or whatever, 10 to 25, you do owe that to them eventually. But if you don't raise X amount of dollars, if you don't raise $250,000 or more, it's forgiven. So not having money is no excuse for not getting your paperwork in order right away.
Really good advice. So with that, I'm going to close. Sheri and Doug, it's really been a pleasure talking today. And I really hope that, folks have learned a couple of things from your journey. First of all, you don't have to be the expert in everything, and you have to go after concentric circles to go find people who have skill sets that you need, and don't be afraid to contact them to really get to the types of people that you need to succeed in your business. Secondly, hopefully you've learned how to take an idea and actually create it into a product, and that this idea of being scrappy, even if you've been in the business for 5 to 8 years, is really important, because as you're evolving your product, you continue to have that scrappiness as you're testing new features and so forth. Third is when you find the right people, hire them and create a fun and driven culture, but make sure that you follow your gut. And so Doug shared examples of how people came on through 6 months to 1 year consulting contracts, got to know them, and then brought them on. And now he has a really superstar team. And then I think finally, this is going to be a really hard journey. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to do, a lot of tough turns, including firing people, and you just have to really enjoy and love what you're doing. I think, Doug and Sheri, that's one thing that we've seen on this chat today, is how much you believe in your product. You guys love working with each other, and you're having a blast doing it. And so with that, it's a wrap, and I hope all our listeners are energized to get moving and to turn their potential into action. So thanks for taking the time, Doug and Sheri, and we look forward to seeing where else you'll be charging up.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks,
you. Vanessa. Thanks for having us.
It was great. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.